friends. How are you all doing today? Today we are going to be talking about the open game license, Hasbro, Dungeons and Dragons, and a whole bunch of alternatives that a lot of you may have never considered. Am I get this working? Yes, it is working. Haha! It works! Hello, Heidzaraf. Hello, Jerieris. Hello, Camino. Hello to all of you wonderful beings. Oh wait, is that showing up on... Wait a minute. Oh no, it's there. It's just... Right up there. Okay, cool. That'll show up as soon as people talk more. Awesome. So, let's talk about Dungeons and or Dragons. Starting out though, what is the OGL? The OGL is the Open Game License. There are better videos out there by people who are more informed on the legal side of things than me. I'm going to be talking about what RPG systems mean, how to use them effectively, how to decide which one's right for you. I'm not going to get into all the nitty-gritty details of the Open Game License, but let's just set up some baseline stuff first. The Open Game License for Dungeons and Dragons used to mean that you can make content for Dungeons and or Dragons. You can make content for the system. Even if you are using some D&D based stuff, you're allowed to make things and you're allowed to profit off of it. And, well, I've said a few times before about companies that kill the golden goose. Making your own content, your own homebrew, or even literally founding a company to make D&D content used to be a viable thing to do. It used to be entirely reasonable to say, yes, my company is going to be making tabletop RPG stuff that uses D&D as its base and for publicity, but takes an entirely new direction that's going to be more interesting for my audience. And what that does, and what a reasonable business person would see here is, oh, cool, people are making content for us. That's free content. That's absolutely wonderful. People are going to be making all this wonderful content for us that we don't have to pay them for. And it's still going to benefit us because people are still going to be thinking of D&D, and it still is, part of the D&D world. So cool. And then we can run promotions, take some of the best and turn it into official canon works, like what happened with Eberron, and the same thing happened with Skyrim. Skyrim modding community, fantastic. Skyrim made a whole bunch of mods. That's a delight. These people want to mod their own things and their own favorite stuff into Skyrim. Cool. That is creating content that we don't have to be involved in the creation thereof. That's creating content that we don't need to supervise or personally respond to, but that's still making our game more popular. And then, well, greed, there's no other way to say it, greed kicks in, and you say, oh, neat, people are using our game to make mods. I wonder how we could monetize these people's passion. They clearly love our game, so how can we make money off of them enjoying our game? This is a tragedy. This is not good game design. This is not good community management. It's basically bad for everybody involved, because you run the risk of killing the golden goose. That is to say, fan-made content is the golden goose. It's the gift that keeps on giving. It's what you receive from your fans out of love and passion and dedication for your game. And saying, but what if we try to squeeze more money out of them? Well, you get a whole bunch of people who are no longer happy to be making your products for free. And all of this was laser targeted towards one particular company. I'll get to that in a few moments. But I want to talk about this as a general thing first, because this is not an isolated incident. It's very similar to what they tried to do with the Bethesda's Creation Club before they walked it back and reconsidered what they're doing. It's what happens anytime somebody who's not familiar with the games industry starts trying to make financial decisions on behalf of the games industry. And it will keep happening. This will happen again. This will continue to happen again and again and again. At a certain point, you don't hire people because they are passionate about making video games, or tabletop games in this case. At a certain point, you hire people who are experts in their field. If you want to hire an accountant, yeah, hiring an accountant who's good at D&D is, ideal because you kind of want everyone in your culture of your company to be good at, to be enjoying D&D. But if you're working for Wizards of the Coast and you need to hire an accountant, you might just hire the best accountant. You might just hire somebody who's good at numbers. You might just say, okay, you're a good accountant. We're going to hire you as an accountant. Well, that's fine. That's good. There's nothing wrong with that. But now you have an accountant who doesn't know about Dungeons or Dragons. No, that's fine. That's not a problem. They're just making the books balanced. Okay, so we have this new guy in marketing. Cool. Does he play D&D? What is he like? Oh, no. He doesn't do anything like that. But he's really good at marketing. You see where this is going. You start to get less and less people who are actually share the vision of the design team involved in the game. And eventually, you hit the point where people are making business decisions without understanding the gaming marketplace, network, infrastructure, world, whatever you want to call it. People who don't know games are making decisions about video games. Which is usually a bad time. And in this case, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if D&D lost a massive part of their audience because they destroyed a ton of goodwill. They keep on revising it. The latest revision walks back a lot of the things and reads as a company who's scared but is trying to desperately cling to some power and some control of the situation. Like now I'm hearing that they're still wanting to maintain ownership of the races, like, weird fantasy races like humans and orcs and kobolds. Yeah, no, they can't do any of this. This is not even a thing they can do. It's not even a thing that they have the legal right to do or the ability to do. And frankly, it's simultaneously silly and insider trading for them to think that that they have the ability to control, well, intellectual properties like this. So I have one sec. Where's my notepad? I have a bunch of TTRPGs I've played. Many of these are not modern RPGs. In fact, the vast majority of them are quite ancient, since a lot of my time playing RPGs was in the early 2000s. Hello, Endking, welcome. So, is this list going to be helpful? Well, no. But I want to talk about these things for a specific reason, and that specific reason is going to be helpful. Where is my chat? People not talking that much? Wow, people are not talking that much. Okay. Looks like the next couple texts will finally get on screen. It's just slow chat day. Hi, chat. Hope you're having a good time. Okay. So. These aren't really in any particular order. Not except for the first one. Let's open up with the Star Wars West End D6 RPG. This was a fun game. This game came out in, oh my goodness, when did this game come out? I need to find this out for myself. 1987. Wow. Yeah, that tracks. Goodness. So this is an ancient system. What does it do? What is it baseline? What does it do? Well, its goal is to immerse you into the Star Wars universe. I mean, sure, right? Anything can have that goal as a meaningless goal. What does the goal functionally do? Well, this was very early. This, I'm pretty sure, predates Dungeons and or Dragons. When was first edition of Dungeons and Dragons? No, it was back in '74. Never mind. It was before D&D 3.5, which was the one that really pushed popularity. Wow, D&D 3.5 wasn't until 2003. Good grief, I didn't realize it was that. Anyways, Time. Okay, so the general idea of the system is that it has rules for all the Star Wars things. All the Star Wars things, races, campaign options, weapons, vehicles, lots of weapons and vehicles sections. What are the core mechanics? Well, I think this is going to be a fun thing to talk about in all these systems. So let's talk about the core mechanics. When you have a stat on your card, you have a d6 associated with it. Am I only going to talk about Vampire the Masquerade, or am I going to talk about all of World of Darkness? I've only played Masquerade and Dark Ages, Vampire Dark Ages. So those are the only two that I can personally talk about. But I will be opening this up to audience opinions and audience thought. This entire thing, if you have anything, questions or thoughts or whatever else, this is all available for everyone to talk about. But let's start with Star Wars. A nice thing about the Star Wars system is that it was very malleable. If you had... So you had your stat lines, and this progression went d6, d6 plus 1, d6 plus 2, d6 plus 3, 2d6. 2d6 plus 1. Okay? Wheel of Time was a tabletop? Yes, there was a tabletop game based on it, and I have a funny story about it. So the idea here is that here's your progression. So level up, level up, level up, all the way here. A competent character could probably had somewhere around 3d6 plus 2 was a solid stat line to have. You know, like an acceptable stat line. And I kind of like that because rolling d6s gives you a bell curve. I assume that people know about this, but just on the off chance that people do not, I'm going to say about it. So, what is a bell curve? Well, if you roll a d20, what are the odds that you roll a 20? It's 1 in 20. This is math. Come on, you know this. You know this. If you roll a d20, what's your odds of getting a 10? It's 1 in 20. Come on. You guys got this. Come on. I believe in you guys. Okay, so. Any number you chance on rolling a d20 is a 1 in 20 chance of getting that number. Cool. Let's say you roll 2d6. What are the chances of rolling a 1? Well, I guess the lowest number you can get is a 2 on 2d6. 1 in 36. What are your odds of rolling a 7? And yes, it is about 3 to 4%. 1 in 36 is right around there, so yeah, spot on. What are your chances of rolling a 21 on a 20? By default, none. Your chance of rolling a 7 is 16%. Or 17%. Somewhere around there. It's... What is that, 7 out of 36? Yeah, it's 6 out of 36. So because you can roll 1 and 6, you can roll 2 and 5, you can roll 3 and 4, you can roll 4 and 3, and the other ways around. So your odds of getting a 7 on 2d6 is much higher, which means, and the odds of getting the extreme ends of the spectrum are much lower. This is a good thing. This is a fantastic thing, because this gives you a bell curve. A bell curve of probability. If somebody is rolling 2d6, they're very likely to be rolling a 7. And any deviation from a 7 gets significantly more and more unlikely. So if somebody is very lucky and they're rolling 2d6, well, you're going to mitigate that luck by giving them a bell curve. Multi-dice games tend to skew characters towards average performance. Yes and no. I mean, yes, you have more reliable results. That doesn't mean you don't have things that can be outliers. Doesn't mean you can't have wild things. But yes, you are absolutely correct that they do skew the characters towards a baseline statistical average, which means it's easier for the player to guess if they're going to succeed. It's easier for the DM to guess what a good difficulty level is going to be, because the difference between rolling a 3 and a 17, is equally likely. Whereas a DM can say, okay, if they're rolling 3d6, they're probably going to roll about an 11 about a 10.5. If they're rolling 3d6 plus 2, I can expect them to roll about 15, which means that that's a good target number. That means that I can go up by 3 or 4 and make it a very difficult number, maybe make them spend some resource to be able to claim it. Or I can go down a few notches to make it a bit easier and more likely. It means that the GM has a lot more control in setting probabilities. Because that's all a skill check is. Every game has a skill check. I would argue that the reason that we have games is to manage skill checks. And the Star Wars West End D6 is entirely obsolete. It's an old system that was played back in the late 80s, early 90s. And the fact that it existed and actually had some ideas that are very good is laudable. Am I recommending you go play D6 Star Wars? No, I am not. I am absolutely not recommending that. I really am not. Not that it's bad, but it's better as a historical piece than is actually a fun game to play. But I wanted to bring it up first, A, because that was my first RPG, and B, because I wanted to establish this idea of randomization. Something that is going to be... What randomization means to a game is going to change drastically as we go through all of these, right? What randomization means to game and game design and game development is a big part of my life, frankly. But but in this case, it's an important decision that you need to make when you're looking at a system. So that's my talk about what Star Wars West End. Did it have issues? Absolutely. But this stat line, this stat advancement right here, actually kind of hype. Actually kind of useful. Kind of good. Okay. Next I want to talk about this one here. Freeform role-playing. This is where I get to put on my pretentious hat and be pretentious, because you know what? I'm allowed to be. I have an acting degree. I played a bunch of games with actors, and sometimes you just sit down in a room full of actors and somebody will start improvising. This is a real thing that happens. If you were in a room full of actors, be advised that this is a risk that could happen at any moment. This could just look. All I'm saying is that at any brief moment, someone could just start going into questions game or setting up a scene or whatever. Isn't that just playing pretend? Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. It's putting yourself into a character and playing pretend. Isn't that what all of this is at the end of the day? Okay, what are the limitations of freeform system? Because functionally, this is systemless. What are the benefits of it? The benefits are there's no limitations, right? The benefits are anything that you say goes. If I say that I do a backflip, I do a backflip. If I say I do 13 backflips in a row, then that's fine. You don't even need a GM for this half the time. Sometimes it's just some people going around, dropping into a character and just being in character with other people, you know? That's a thing that you can happen at nerd conventions as well. Or you can have a GM and have the GM be somebody who sets the scene, and then usually after they set the scene, they'll just incorporate themselves into the roleplay. There's no risk. The thing with freeform roleplay is that there's no risk, there's no probability, there's no dice involved, which is fine, but it changes the dynamics of the world. It changes the dynamics of what you're doing. And everybody has to be on the same page. And this is another thing that's going to be a recurring theme for today, is people being on the same page. If you are playing pretend, if you are playing this freeform role-playing, this systemless game, and somebody says, I pull out a gun and shoot you, then, well, were you playing a thing that had guns? Is this a reasonable thing for them to do? Why did they pull out a gun? Should you be able to say, haha, I dodged? Like you're on kindergarten? Do you play out a death scene? Why did somebody do that? Well, they felt for whatever reason that in the scene they wanted to shoot a gun. And that may or may not be a good thing. I would say, it's usually not, but so be it. The systemless role-playing runs that risk of people playing different games. You know, if one person wants to play a home house setting scene where you get ready for dinner, and somebody else wants to play 40K, well, guess what? One person's going to ruin it for everybody else. We'll be getting more into social contracts later on, but I wanted to touch on this and just remind people that it is an option. If you have a Discord server with a role-playing section, it probably is freeform, either with or without a GM. If you have a lot of LARPing systems, I have LARPs aside here later to talk about in more specific natures, but LARPing is usually just freeform. Going to the Renaissance Fair is freeform role-playing. Just walking around and saying, "Hello, good day, sir. How do you do this fine day? If you've found any rutabagas," I don't know. That is freeform role-playing. Something that is a delight, you know? Go to your local Renaissance Festival, go to your local Ren Fair, go to it, have a good time, it'll be a blast. But also understand that is functionally a diceless RPG that you're engaging in. You are engaging in imagination and just playing pretend. Which is fine, there's nothing wrong with that. If you have a casual system, it might not need any more mechanics. That might be everything that you need. Okay. Should I go right into Big Eye Small Mouth now, or should we go somewhere else first? Because I feel like I have a good segue into Big Eye Small Mouth, because, oh my goodness, does this game require social contracts. Big Eye Small Mouth, also known as BESM, do not misspell that. It will mess up your search history. It's Big Eyes Small Mouth. Anyways, just be conscious of that. So, Big Eyes Small Mouth, which apparently, when's that most recent edition come out? I actually have no idea. Oh wow, 4th edition actually came out in 2020. Neat. Is an extremely breakable game. Usually we manage by setting up some sort of setting and maybe specifying some sort of combat RP. Yeah, and that comes down to that social contracts. It comes down to talking to people and everybody agreeing on what kind of game it is that you want to play. And that's critical for Big Eye Small Mouth. Is my stuff actually getting off screen here? Is that... Oh yeah, it was. Okay. Cool. Where was I saying words about? So, Big Eye Small Mouth is the anime RPG. It is extremely anime, and it is painfully open-ended. If you have, I don't remember the points values, let's say you had 40 points to make a character. You could literally go infinite and have a giant mech that itself had a larger giant mech that itself had a smaller giant mech that could do infinite damage. Or you could have a schoolgirl who is just really good at gossiping and bad at sports. The system is open-ended to a fault. Now, I played a game of Big Eye Small Mouth where one person was playing a bruiser who could punch and do like 20 damage per turn by punching people into a wall. Somebody else was playing a gunsmith who had a special custom sniper rifle that could hit for like almost 50 damage, but could only fire once per round. Somebody else had a pair of glaives that hit for 8 damage and could only be swung, but they could be swung twice per round. So one player was doing, on average, 16 damage in combat per turn. Another player was dealing 50 or so with one shot with their gun. And another player was doing 20 damage per hit with two attacks unarmed. So the person with knives was doing under half, less than half of the damage of either of the other players. And all of them spent their points. All of them spent their points how they wanted to. This is what I mean by one of these social contracts, where you need to discuss what kind of game it is we're playing and what sort of power level we're all going to be playing at. Because the player because this was intended to be a fairly combat-heavy campaign. So the player that was involving the weaker attacks spent their points more on social stuff. I think they could transform into an eagle or something like that. It was cool. It was a good character. It was interesting. It was dynamic, and it did nothing in combat, and they felt bad and bored because I had to balance combat around the party, and balancing combat around the party ended up just being impossible because I couldn't throw anything at the players that this one person could threaten. I couldn't really create a combat encounter that worked for all the players in the game because the players were playing at different levels. Like the one person was simply like they were playing on different levels. You can see this in a lot of systems. You can see this in D&D if you're playing with somebody who's character optimized and somebody who's just made a character based off their RP desires, which is both are perfectly valid, both are perfectly fine. But if you have one person who's made their RP character who has, no real functional attacks, and somebody else is playing a character optimized ranger that Tabaxi that can do 6 billion damage per turn, well, guess what? Someone at the table is not going to have fun. If you're in combat, then it's going to be the person who made the NPC. If you're out of combat, the person not having fun is going to be the person who made their entire character around combat. So you need to talk to your players. This is true of any system. Again, these are all general things that I'm highlighting using Big Eyes Small Mouth in this case because that's a good example, frankly, of a system that requires it. Because D&D doesn't require that. Everybody will be roughly playable in a D&D game. And in many of these systems, you'll have a character that can do what you're trying to set it out to do. But you need to have that session 0. You need to talk with your DMs about what playing the game means to each of the players. What do the players want to get out of it? Because if somebody wants a combat encounter every single session, if somebody wants combat every single time that they pull out their character sheet, and somebody else is only there for political intrigue and drama, and somebody else is just there because, well, they want to throw the clack-clack dice around and because it's funny, you're probably not going to have a great time because your group cohesion is going to be trash. It's just going to be garbage. It's just going to be garbage. Is that better? Sorry, just checking my everything's. A good DM is paramount to a fun RP experience, but the GM alone cannot determine these things on behalf of the players. You're right. Any system can be good with a good GM. With a good group of people, any of these systems can be fantastic. But some of these systems are going to be more tuned towards what you're trying to accomplish. If you are playing, Vampire, or if you like, Vampire is a really good example of this because if you're playing Vampire, you don't need to have combat. You could just have a non-combat game that is entirely politicking. I don't even think people would mind most of the time, but it was going to be an inherently different game than if you were playing Vampire and your goal is to just punch people all day long. If your goal is to just diablerize everything in sight, you're going to be playing a completely different game. And discussing with the players, and the players discussing amongst each other what they want out of a game is extraordinarily important. For example, like my game with Kashak, which has been on the YouTubes and will be again next week, and there's a playlist on my channel. It's the Luminian campaign. I'm not going to lie, I wanted more combat. I love everything that I'm doing, and I love my character, and I love where it's going. But me as a player, it's kind of like, yeah, but I want to punch some nerds. Yeah, but I kind of want to, just suplex somebody. I'm having a blast, and I'm loving where the campaign's going, so I'm not really complaining. But part of me is like, when do I actually get to punch somebody? And it sounds silly to say, but it's true, And I think at least one other player in the campaign is feeling the same way. Whereas conversely, I in some other games, like in the last one shot I played with Chive, I was like, I never needed combat to come. I was okay without any combat. And we ended up having multiple encounters there, and so it's just like, yeah, sure, but I kind of just want to talk things out and, you know, play the whole film noir detective thing out. Just different styles for different players, and working with your players and understanding that is core. Let's talk about the big one. D&D 3.5. You know it. You probably have opinions about it. Dungeons and or Dragons 3.5 really is the system that brought D&D into the mainstream. That's when D&D stopped being this weird game for kids and nerds who lived in their parents' basement into being the cool thing for cool people to do. That's right, we're all cool now. Did you know that? It's true. You in chat? Yeah, you're watching this. You're cool. Where's my hand? There it is. You're cool. My finger is supposed to be extended. Why is it tracking that? It's not tracking that. Anyways, you're cool. Where is it? Come on, I'm trying to. You're cool. Good enough. I'll have to take that. So, and keep in mind, I'm somebody who grew up when, you know, being a nerd was something that, you know, was actually an insult that was being used as an insult as opposed to being, like, reclaimed like it is now. So, Dungeons and or Dragons is... I could start with D&D First Edition. I could talk about Second Edition. I could build up, like, an entire D&D history. I'm not going to do that. I don't care. We're going to be talking specifically about 3.5, Second Edition, and 5th Edition, because those are the ones I have the most experience in. And then I'm just going to be me and talk about 4th Edition for like an hour, because it's me. I have opinions. If you disagree with them, let me know in the comments. You're wrong. I'm right, but let me know in the comments. Okay, so 3.5 fixed a lot of things that were broken with previous editions. It also broke some new things in fantastic and exciting ways, but D&D 3.5 was really the keystone moment for Dungeons & Dragons as a franchise. It's where D&D really came into its own and said, here's what we do, here's what we do that's unique, interesting, and here, let's go. What does it do that's unique and interesting? Well, to be quite blunt, what D&D is good at is creating a very sanitized, generic fantasy world. And it's supposed to, because any of the specifics of that can be filled out by the GM, by the players. D&D, like, if anybody ever says, oh, the campaign takes place in Greyhawk, ignore the fact that they said that, because that just means it takes place in a generic fantasy world. You know, we all know what a generic fantasy world looks like these days. And a lot of it, of what it looks like, is inspired by D&D, that took so many of these, you know, generic medieval high fantasy wizards and warriors elements and shoved them into one very easy digestible tablet. Now, 3.5 grew in popularity. It's foundational, but not the meat of a campaign. Yeah, exactly. So 3.5, what does it do well? It gives you baseline tools for just about everything. What does it do poorly? It doesn't do enough specific to really highlight certain types of gaming. And this will be very obvious. If you are like many of the people who don't know half the things in this list, then you are going to have an eye-opening moment here in a little bit. So, the downside is that it can be very rules-heavy. Especially when D&D 3.5 was getting long in the tooth, you had the MMO problem, something I've talked about on the channel several times. The problem of, hey, I want to play this new MMO. Cool! This MMO is definitely going to beat WoW. Cool! Only one problem, you're comparing a new game to a game that's been out for 6 years. You're comparing a new game, regardless of what it is, regardless of who made it, regardless of what the baseline is. You're making a new game and trying to compete with a game that's been out for so long that it has an established following and dozens of rulebooks. That's never going to work. People are never going to go for that because, well, this one had more content. This one has more stuff. just more stuff in general. So, baseline set. D&D 3.5, and its 5 editions is not that much different from 3.5 in a lot of meaningful ways. 5th edition is a good edition of D&D. I'm not going to say it isn't. But they are good foundations. They are good baseline. Here are a set of tools to do with as you please. You know, use these tools, use your imagination, break the tools. I mean, seriously, just, you know, if you have a GM that's okay with it, as long as you're not doing something overpowered, break the tools that are given to you. Take the tools and use them to make something new. Alright, so what does 2nd edition do? 2nd edition is actually really good for dungeon dives. D&D 2nd edition is actually still really fun if you don't care about your character. If you're making a character that's going to go into a deep dungeon and the entire campaign is going to be you're going into this dungeon, you're going to kill a bunch of orcs, and then that's the campaign. You know, that can be fun. 2nd edition, you can still use any of the imagination stuff. You can still add freeform. And always remember that the freeform can be added to any system, and should be added to almost every system, frankly. But 2nd edition, if you're just going diving headfirst into a dungeon, can still be a good time. There's a lot of ways that 2nd edition is broken, but if you choose to revel in that, if you choose to say, yeah, this is broken, let's bloody go, you can have a good time with it. Okay. What is the Wheel of Time game? Wheel of Time actually was a D&D 3.5 module that people made. And why am I bringing it up here? Because this is exactly what OGL is trying to stop from existing. Somebody took Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, a mediocre fantasy series from the 90s and from the early 2000s. Yeah, I said it. Fight me. Fight me. No. I have read almost all of those books. I have my opinions and I've made them, and it's medium at best. It's mid at best. Okay, anyways. So someone said, "Hey, let's take Robert Jordan's work because they made an interesting world. A little bit racist, a little bit sexist, but you know what? Overall, cool world. Let's take it and put it into Dungeons and/or Dragons." Okay. They made a bunch of classes. They made a bunch of content. They threw a bunch of stuff at the wall and said, "Cool. Now this exists." Did they make money off it? I don't know. Probably a little bit. But the fact is that this was a project of passion first and foremost, you know? I think they did actually get full license. Yeah, they got full licensing to everything involved and put it on market. Imagine right now if somebody was going to take, I don't know, what's on Netflix these days? Imagine right now if somebody wanted to take Vinland Saga and turn it into a D&D campaign. And they could. It would actually translate pretty well over. You'd have to make a handful of adaptations and whatnot. But the new OGL prevents you from taking Vinland Saga, making it into a D&D expansion, and then selling it. At least not with throwing a whole bunch of royalties and possibly even intellectual property rights back at Hasbro. Also, when I played the Wheel in Time campaign, I accidentally made a White Cloak, which are the bad guys. I didn't realize this. I accidentally made a bad guy because my character... I hadn't read the books at this time. I hadn't read the books yet. So my character is like, okay, you guys are really deep in the weeds on this. All of you have read all the books multiple times. I don't know anything. I don't know anything at all about anything, okay? So here's what, here's the plan, here's the goal, here's the hopes, here's the dreams. Oop, there we go. Is that better? I don't know if that's better. So here's the plan, here's the goal, here's the hopes, here's the dreams. And that is... Wow. There we go. And that is that my character doesn't know the world. My character... that's a weird hand. My character doesn't know the world, and that lets me take the perspective of the fish out of water. My character lives in a cabin in the middle of the woods and just has grown up hunting with their father. My character's mother died when they were young from a tragic accident, and Well, recently my father died, and I'm trying to find my way back into society so that I can get some of the essentials for living in the woods, you know. But the idea is that my character had never really seen society. Why was this a problem? Well, it wasn't a problem at all. It was actually a great way because I could ask the questions of like, what's this? What's an Aes Sedai? What is this town like? I've never been here before. It let me ask the fish out of water questions. And when they explained the magic system for me, I'm like, that sounds. I think my character would hate that. That sounds really weird and unnatural and scary. Um, which ended up kind of aligning very much with the ideals of one of the factions that is terrified of magic, that wants to kill all magic users. Why am I saying this story? Well, because it's a funny story. Because I accidentally made I've actually accidentally made a villain in as my player character, but also because it is a way of having a player add a campaign that doesn't know the world. If you were playing Masquerade, or if you were playing L5R, you could do a similar tactic and say, I don't know this world, but I want to play with you guys. But I also don't want to read 30 novels to play with you guys. I don't want to read 14 novels, all of which are very long-winded, to be able to play a game with my friends. So you say, okay, I'm going to play Wheel of Time, but I'm going to play a character that doesn't know the world. You can do that. That's fine. It works really well. You can play a character who is a fish out of water. And that can be if a friend asks you to play, I don't know, like again, Vampire, Shadowrun, L5R, Iron Kingdoms, any of these systems or anything else that's based off an IP. If someone comes up to you with a Gundam game or a Final Fantasy based game or a game based off of Bloons Tower Defense, someone has rules out there for a Monster Hunter Rise based game. I forgot to put this in here. There are rules out there for a Monster Hunter based RPG. And you can say, I've never played Monster Hunter. I don't know if I can join. I don't know if I want to join. That sounds like it's made for people who aren't me. Well, here's what you're in. Here's your in. Say, hey, I want to play, but I want to play a character who knows as much about the world as I know. That is to say, I want to play somebody who is from the outside, who doesn't understand things. Okay? Maybe I woke up from a coma in Shadowrun. Maybe I lived out in the woods in Wheel of Time. Maybe I was a off-planet civilian in Lancer, and I never got to know what the world was like until campaign involves me. Until the campaign allows me to enter as a character, and that's when I can learn about the world in character, as opposed to asking a bunch of out-of-character questions, which can get really annoying real fast. Okay. All right. Pardon me. Let's talk LARP next. So, LARPing is the IRL RPG. A LARPing is when you get in character, usually you dress the role, you have an assigned area where you will be playing, and you go out and you play in character in that area with all of the other players who are also playing in character in that area too. Okay. The best example I can give is to say Renaissance fairs. If there's a Renaissance fair and people are going there and and talking in their old-timey medieval accents, terrible accents, absolutely the worst accents you've ever heard, but they sound medieval to themselves, and that's what matters. That's not a medieval accent even. It's not even a British accent. But that's what you're going to hear. You can hear this, you know. Actually, you used to be able to do a really good British accent, fun fact. That's what you're going, you know, and it's just people having fun. The LARPing is freeform role-playing in a lot of ways. It's freeform role-playing in a set area with set stuff. Now, then LARPing combat can take it a step further. Usually with foam weapons, different systems have different rules. Usually something along the lines of if you bonk somebody, then they're out. If you bonk somebody and they're wearing armor, you have to bonk them twice. If you have a spell, congratulations, you have a little bag of rice. You throw the bag of rice at somebody. If you hit them, your spell hit them successfully. That's it. It's adding real life physicality into freeform role playing. If you have the opportunity, now these are always events. There's very few places. Hello, Connor, welcome. There's very few places where you will find just LARPs, like open LARPs, outside of Renaissance festivals. But you will have the opportunity at either a convention or out in a field somewhere, have the opportunity to join one. And it'll be quite the experience. Now, there's a danger of LARPing. One, accessibility, because if you don't have, I don't know, good knees, if you're wheelchair bound, if you can't, walk cleanly, well, you probably can't participate in combat in this, because combat is actually running up, jumping around, and hitting people with foam swords. It's not fursuiting is LARPing technically. I would say fursuiting is freeform. Fursuiting is freeform role playing more than LARPing. Though I guess it is. It really does fit into both. I guess. So you know what? Fair. I'll accept that. So, one is accessibility issues. LARPing has accessibility issues because you can only do whatever you could do IRL, by and large. Now, if you have a physical disability and you want to LARP, you can probably be accommodated, and people will probably jump, hand over fist to try to make sure that there is an accommodation for you if it's a cool group. But you're not going to be able to play a dashing swordsman if you only have, if you don't have any arms, right? There's going to be some limitations there that you will not be able to overcome. And on the flip side, if you are athletic, you might be able to be a champion in a LARP, and you might have a blast with it. Or you could just be a non-combat class, say, hey, I'm going to be over at the healer's tent. Is airsoft LARPing with guns? I would say absolutely. It doesn't have to be, but paintball and airsoft absolutely could be doing that if you were getting into it. Like, if you were just playing paintball with your friends. I know more about paintball, so I'm going to say paintball, but everything I say pertains to airsoft as well. If you are getting into the military tactics and giving yourselves code names and clearing buildings and stuff, then yeah, airsoft is functionally a LARP at that point. Paintball is functionally a LARP at that point. But it doesn't have to be. It could just be a game of paintball, Humans vs. Zombies, Nerf LARP. I've done one of those in paintball. I've actually done a Humans vs. Zombies in paintball. It was a good time. Okay. And yeah, I guess that would absolutely qualify as a LARP. Alright, what are we talking about next? You've done Human vs. Zombies before? Nice. Okay. Let's talk setting. And what better to talk setting with than Shadowrun? A game that has a fantastic setting that can drive people to... Oh, don't worry, we'll get to you, Vampire. I see you there. Don't worry, I'll get to you. So, Shadowrun is a really interesting system. It's a cyberpunk system, takes place in the near future. And for the record, I'm going to lump Shadowrun and cyberpunk into the same category here. Shadowrun is cyberpunk with fantasy races. No, seriously, cyberpunk is like Shadowrun is a cyberpunk game, with the caveat that reality snapped, magic came back into the world. Some people turned into orcs, some people turned into elves. You know how it is. These things happen. So that's basically the long story short of Shadowrun. It's a cyberpunk game. It's a good one. But when you think of cyberpunk Catgirl Jade, I mean, a little bit. That's happened before. When you think of cyberpunk, you think of Blade Runner. You think of Lawnmower Man. You think of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. You think of all these very appropriate cyberpunky things, and all the main characters in those tend to fit the loner stereotype. Less so now with the cyberpunk TV show, which is fantastic and actually shows some different angles on it. Fifth Element, yeah. Fifth Element is a really good cyberpunk. But what was I saying? Yes. So this can push you into a certain stereotype. After some people who had never played Shadowrun before were told about Shadowrun, they all sat down and said, "I'm going to make a loner character who is fighting against the system." So we had 4 loner characters who were ready to fight against the system, who had nothing tying themselves to each other, because everybody made their character based on the world and didn't really think, "Wait a minute, this character doesn't really fit with the other human beings, with the other actual people that I'm playing with. Oh no, that's not great." And it ended up being an absolute mess. Um, Something that I can certainly share horror stories about later. I will say, though, these systems are very good, but anytime you have a system that leads people towards a certain end, you need to be conscious of where that end is. Likewise, and now is where I backtrack. You see, there's going to be this backtracking is like a whole thing. It rhymes. Um, Likewise, with a LARP. Now, if you are LARPing something, it makes you a lot closer to your character when you're doing it in person. Okay? This can add a danger because it can remove the separation of person and character. You see? And people will occasionally become, I don't want to say consumed because that makes it sound like wild. I don't want to say it too insultingly. But even in an otherwise reasonable individual, the border between being in a game and being in reality can break down. And again, we'll talk about this with Vampire, because that's another very clear example of it where it can happen. But Shadowrun and Cyberpunk can do it as well on tabletop, just because so much of the world is so similar to what we have. There can be, people can feel a lot more connected to it. If you're playing a fantasy game, you know you're playing a fantasy game. If you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, you're going to be giggling about Dungeons and Dragons and, you know, killing bandits. You're not going to be thinking about that bandit had a family. They turned to being a bandit because they wanted to feed their only child after their wife died, and that bandit was only going to be doing this for a few years while they were waiting for a merchant ship to get back. Because their friend promised them that they could. I don't know. I'm just going off the cuff here, but the thing is that that's an entirely plausible and ridiculous story. And that kind of ridiculous story becomes a lot more personal when you're playing a game that takes place in our world, right? If you're playing Shadowrun or Cyberpunk and you're thinking about these corporate structures and you're like, "Oh, wait a minute. I work for a corporate structure." Ooh, all of a sudden the game can become a lot less comfortable because you can get really too close to it. Now, combine these. Combine the closeness of reality of something like Cyberpunk with the tangibility of reality, where people are physically in the world and physically role-playing themselves, and the difference between game and reality can break down. And that sounds insane. That sounds insane to say, right? Like, we're adults. We know the difference from fantasy and reality. It is absurd to think that somebody wouldn't understand the difference between fantasy and reality. And yet you hear so many stories about it. It happens. It just happens even to otherwise rational people, because this person in the LARP is no longer their character. They're themselves. And their character isn't the one insulting you. They're insulting you. And you're a lot stronger than them in the LARP. Well, they can't do this. Well, I can't really hurt them in the LARP, but I can slash their tires. This is the thing that's happened, not to me. This is a thing that has actually happened several times. Usually with Vampire. Alright, fine, we'll get there right now. This is the time. We're talking about Vampire now. Things that do that. Sorry, I need to go back a step. Things that Wheel of Time does well is it showed me how to incorporate an IP. Frankly, it's the idea that it shows how to incorporate a intellectual property into a existing game. Same with Star Wars. Same with anything else. You can create a system that has what you want in it, and you can either create it yourself or somebody else probably has. There's an official licensed D&D module for My Little Pony. After all, I mean, like, come on, there's anything you want is out there. The pros and cons of LARP. The pro is that it is reality. This is as close to reality as you'll get. Going out in a costume and going out with people who are like-minded will be a blast, and you will have an amazing time. But you run the risk of people getting too attached and things getting too personal, or, in some cases, this is also true, it can be not personal enough. Sometimes people will be too personal about it and the game will become their reality. Other times people will do the opposite and dismiss anything that like actually hurting someone's emotions in game, not realizing that that person is a real person outside of the game as well. You might say something that cuts to somebody in the game and then just laugh it off like, oh, what are you talking about? It was just a game. Come on, separate fantasy from reality. And people can fail to recognize that they actually hurt somebody. They actually hurt somebody's emotions. So both sides of the coin, of people being too invested into it to the point where the LARP becomes their reality, even in an otherwise rational person, because things are so closely aligned to the real world. And the flip side of saying, oh, my character just, this isn't going to carry over in anything else. I accidentally hurt somebody in the game, but whatever, it's just a game. Well, the people are still real. And again, this does apply to everything, but I'm specifically calling it out on LARP because that's the one that tends to push that border a little bit too close. Yeah, it's just a joke energy is true, yeah. But without any malicious intent, right? It's, oh, whoops, I didn't think that this was actually going to hurt you. Like, we're rivals in the, we're rival factions in the world. I didn't say anything to hurt you or hurt our friendship. I was attacking your base because that, like whatever it is, somebody getting too close or too far away from reality. And there is a line of balance. It's easy to think that the more into it you get, the better, because you're getting into character and you're really pushing into this mind space of being your character rather than yourself, which can be a blast, which genuinely can be fun. And yeah, it's a thing that you have to be conscious of both for yourself and for people around you because, well, people. Now let's talk about Vampire. Vampire takes place in our world. We'll talk about Masquerade first. Masquerade Vampire takes place in our world. And the idea is that there is a secret hidden undercroft of all these magical creatures in the world that you are living in. This cannot be understated. The baseline of this world is your world. And it's very, very common, especially in Masquerade, for people to take these ideas and treat them as building off of the real world that you live in. I.e., it might take place at your local town so that the players go, oh my gosh, I know that library. Oh, you're saying that there's a secret thing behind the bushes every night at 5, whatever, I don't know. But because of that inherent design that is intended from the ground up to draw you into the world that is the vampire world, it recontextualizes the things you look at. Next time you drive past the library, you might be thinking about your vampire game. That's a good thing. Honestly, on the whole, that's a good thing. If you can encourage your players to think about you and what you do. Come out here a bit. Hi, how's it going? If you can encourage your players to think about your game while they're participating in the real world, while they're in the regular society, that can be a good thing. That can help them with the immersion for their character. But it runs the risk. Also, I will say Vampire is excellent for non-combat games, partially because I think the combat in Vampire is a bit clunky compared to some of the other options on the list. But moreover, it has a lot of tools for social combat. It has a lot of tools built into the game system itself that encourage players to look at um, solving things non-violently. And it has the violence to back it up if you want to, but Masquerade and Dark Ages both have a strong set of rules for managing talking to somebody. Now, again, if you go back to Freeform, anything you say is anything you say, right? I can just say words, but once you start getting into systems, you start saying into, well, my character says something that is either smarter or dumber than I can think of in real life, right? If you are a jock and you are playing a bard, you might need to say, my bard has a really witty quip, but IRL, I can't think of it. I got nothing. But I want to play this bard because that's my fantasy. Because that's what I want to do. Because that's what's important to me. Okay, cool. And it's on the DM, maybe either to help supply them lines or to help reinforce this fantasy and say, you say something so clever and cutting that they backs down in shock. You know, like that moment. Or on the flip side, you might be a very, very intelligent individual who is playing an orc, and it's like, and you might just sort of reveling in this, I don't know where I'm supposed to go, and just be like, kicking yourself, being like, oh, I know the answer to this puzzle, but I can't say it because my character's dumb, which can be fun. Like, it's a different type of fun. Anyways, the social stuff in Vampire has a lot of rules attached to it, so if you want to convince somebody, you have to, like, if you want to show that you have enough etiquette to be able to dine at a table in a proper establishment, the rules are in there. Despite the fact that you can wear shorts and a t-shirt into almost any high-end restaurant in North America. In my experience, I've seen people. The servers won't treat you as well, but they'll let you in. But in the vampire world, you know, this idea of the Victorian, oh, you have to be proper posh, and if you can convince me that you're of old money, then I don't see why I'd talk to you, as very much alive and real. And, well, the systems are in place to establish that. Vampire Dark Ages is Vampire the Masquerade that takes place in a medieval time period, which is funny because you can just run a D&D campaign in a Vampire Dark Ages system. The only real difference is that the system's tools will encourage you to play a different game. That is to say, because Vampire has these social combat tools, these discussion tools, because Vampire has these niches and these politicking groups, you can play the same campaign you could play in 3.5 or in 5th edition, and it will come across much differently because the people that you're playing with will be using different sets of tools. The system can change the way the game is played. It sounds obvious, but at the same time, it's not. It's really not. Because the system will lead you down certain lines. If you're playing D&D 5e, by nature you're probably going to be playing a slightly more combat-focused game. If you're playing a freeform game, it's going to be non-combat at all, because the freeform systems don't have combat systems. That's kind of what you're missing out of that package. But if you're just, you know, openly talking to people, and the question is, you know, can I actually convince somebody of something? 5th edition, you can roll persuasion. Masquerade, you can use a combination of 6 different stats to get an edge over your opponent. Shadowrun and Cyberpunk depends on which version of the system. Some of them actually are better or worse at this. But at the end of the day, what is the system for? The system is for giving you rules for things that you couldn't handle in freeform. Again, I'm going to keep on coming back to freeform, the systemless system, because you can do most things with it, except for combat. The only thing you can't do in a freeform system is combat, right? Everything else, as long as everybody's operating in the same level, has the same goals, and the DM has set up an appropriate whatever. Do I not have my background audio on for you guys? Is that better? I thought I had that on the whole time. Whatever. Anyways, the systemless system gives you so many options, but restricts your ability to have any randomization involved, right? And that's the core change of it. Is systems add systems for randomization where randomization needs to occur. And systems add ways for you to weight randomization in your favor. If you want to make a more combat-focused character, you can. If you want to make a more talky character, you can. Whereas in a freeform system, you're just talking. You know, the character is you with your mouth open. And then whatever character you create in that can be anything that you want it to be. But at the end of the day, the system isn't going to support, well, combat for one, but the system isn't going to support randomization. If you say, I'm going to convince the drug dealer to give me a free sample so I can, you know, steal it, okay, try to convince me, and then I, the other player, simply get to decide if that convinced me or not. You see? So what does the system do? It gives you ways of quantifying these non-existent stat lines. What did a vampire do well? Social. Very well. Now let's talk about where systems fail. Now, I'm going to talk about the old Fallout RPG. This one was bad. What makes a system bad? Okay, well, this is a difficult question and not an easy one to answer, which is why I want to talk about it. But the Fallout, for those of you who don't know, is based off of a tabletop game already. Now, I haven't played it, which is the only reason it's not on the list here, but Fallout is based on GURPS, Generic Universal Role-Playing System. The idea of GURPS being that it is infinitely adaptable into anything that the players want, similar to Big Eyes Small Mouth, but not as anime. How's that for an answer, eh? Well, the Fallout game had catastrophically bad mechanics because it forced the player to do everything that the game engine was going to do on its own. Now, let me quickly tell a story here, because a lot of people break down their timelines incorrectly here. D&D 3rd edition came with feats. And what is a feat? Well, it's an option that you get to pick when you level up. It's an option that you can pick to modify your character. Say, if you wanted to, like, you know, be better at cooking, you could take a feat that said, you know, that made it so you can do that. You can take a feat so that you can attack somebody twice, you know, or yeah, get a special ability off of your attacks. You get a feat that made it so you could like the video. Things like that. That's a very important feat. I recommend you take it. So feats in D&D were actually based off of the video game Fallout. That's true. The feats in Dungeons & Dragons were based off of the feats in Fallout. The feats in Fallout were based off of Chris Avallone? No. Were based off of one of the lead devs playtesting the game, deciding that leveling up wasn't interesting enough because all you got to do was assign some stat points, and literally coming up with a system overnight that would be more entertaining. And then they called them perks. And every time every other level you got a new perk, and you could build them up towards doing cool stuff. And D&D's like, you know what? When players level up, they just get a few skill points. Let's use this system from the RPG. But it breaks my brain because in my brain I think of D&D 3.5 coming out like 15 years before Fallout 1. Right then. So why did the Fallout game break down? It broke down because there were too many dependent stats. Your ability to shoot a gun is based off of a combination of your perception skill and your gun handling skill. Your gun handling skill is itself derived from your perception. If you throw somebody into a combat, and their opponent uses any sort of status effect, let's say they get sand thrown in their face. Oh no, you're at perception -2. I just affected half of your rules sheet, because having this base stat changed has affected your ability to shoot guns, your ability to dodge, your ability to recognize enemies inbound. It changed your survival skills slightly. It has a chaining repercussion. In a video game, that's fine. In a video game, that's totally fine because all you do is all handled automatically. But when you translate the video game into a tabletop experience, you are being expected to recalibrate a dozen derived stats off of one stat change. And that sucks. And it just wasn't fun. It was very, very bookkeepy. And fluctuated wildly. What did it do well? Well, it tried to do the same thing Wheel of Time did, and that is take the Fallout world and put it into a tabletop game. But instead of just taking the world, they tried to take the game mechanics too. Fallout is a good video game. That doesn't mean it's a good tabletop game. And that's true also of, like several other franchised things. If you're going to make a Fallout video game, a Fallout tabletop game, I would honestly probably put it into like 13th Age, or Iron Kingdoms actually would probably be a really, really good fit for it. Take this and modify it to be Fallout, rather than just try to hammer a video game system into a tabletop system. It just doesn't always work out the way you want it to. It can be done, and you can adapt things very effectively, but you have to be very careful about doing so. Fine, I'll talk about 4th edition now. It's bookkeeping. I acknowledge this, but it's also fantastic. Now, I was leading up to this before about saying, what does a system do, right? What does Freeform do? It lets you talk and do things. What does, a heavy combat-based system like 2nd Ed do? Well, it gives you all the rules you need for combat. What does 4th edition do? 4th edition turns combat into a board game. A really fun and good board game. 4th edition of Dungeons & Dragons is very board gamey. And your character can do a whole bunch of cool stuff. Everybody's allowed to do cool stuff. It's also very cinematic. It's not video gamey. Trust me. As somebody who's hammered a video game into a tabletop game, 4th Ed ain't it. 4th edition is what happens when you turn a tabletop game into a TV series. It's action oriented. It's cool first, but it also relies on a understanding of the rule of cool, because 4th edition will allow your fighter to yell and swing their axe and hit everybody around them once per combat. Oh, you can only do that once per combat. Well, why can I only do it once per combat, Jade? Well, it's very simple, you see. Shut up. But it's true, though. It's true. Why can you only do, that's... 4th edition gives all the melee classes melee abilities the same way the spellcasters get them. So spellcasters don't get any more abilities than the melee classes. But yeah, the fighter can only throw their hammer at somebody. Like, they can always just throw their hammer, but they can only throw their hammer and have lightning strike it and do thunder damage and knock down the target once per encounter. Why? Because that's good TV, You can't, it's Power Rangers. 4th edition is Power Rangers, okay? 4th edition D&D is Power Rangers, the tabletop game. It's everybody gets to do cool stuff. You can only transform into the Megazord once per episode, but if you're playing the game, it's fantastic. Thing is, 4th edition is very rules light when it comes to non-combat stuff. It's rules dense when it comes to combat stuff. It's really good, but it doesn't have a lot of rules when it comes into camping or talking to the people. It just has some of the basic D&D stuff. It doesn't have a billion rules for there, and that's by design. It's supposed to be that way because the base game is supposed to be freeform. If you're playing a 4th edition game and if you're playing a 3.5 game and you want to be a blacksmith, you say, oh, I take the blacksmith background, and which requires me to have a constitution of 12 and a strength of 14. And with those rules, then if I follow this chart here, because there's always charts in 3.5, if I follow this chart here, then I can craft this level of an item once per day if I have the materials, and I can sell that Same conversation in 4th edition. Hey, my character's blacksmith. Oh, cool. Wait, aren't you a mage? Oh, yeah. I'm a blacksmith mage. I use magic to craft. Whoa. Sick. That's it. That's the conversation. That's genuinely how the conversation goes in 4th edition. Because it's not tying you to rules. 4th edition ties you to a billion rules in combat to create a very interesting and interactive board game, and then expects you to do the opposite outside of that. And part of that is why it didn't get a good reputation, is because, well, people saw all the rules for combat and assumed that it didn't have any good role-playing. It's like, no, it has the best role-playing. The role-playing is whatever you want the role-playing to be. Or people would, like, make a bunch of bad faith arguments. Everybody who says 4th edition is based off of a video game design is somebody who has watched the same YouTube video and never actually played the game. But also, it's time to appreciate how expressive the model. It really is. I love my old model, but this one carries my expressions in the way that my old one didn't. So there's a lot of bad faith arguments about 4th edition, and part of it is, again, the MMO problem. We have this brand new game. Cool. It's replacing D&D 3.5. Okay. It has one book out because it's a new game. One book, you say? Yes, yeah, it's only got the one book yet because it just came out. Do you mean to tell me that there's a D&D game that doesn't have druids in it? Druids are a core concept of Dungeons & Dragons. How dare you? How dare you release this product that doesn't have core things like a druid? Because that's going to be part of the natural power class that comes out in like 8 months. They've already announced that. It's coming out alongside a new class called Shaman and a Warden, which was like a thing. Well, that's not an addition for me. I can't play my favorite character, Druid Drewington. That kind of argument, a lot of people were trying to compare a system that had 5+ years of content and a billion homebrew releases to a system that just came out, leading to a lot of people never actually giving it the opportunity. I would play a 4th edition game again in a heartbeat if someone invited me. And I'll tell you a secret, I still use 4th edition character blocks and abilities in games. I don't tell my players this, but when I need monsters, I go to the 4th edition monster manual and get cool monsters that do interesting things. You like that voice? Well, that character's dead now, I'm sorry. 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 Oh, okay. It was a TPK probably. Yeah, that's right. That's a 3/5 Grognard. So yeah, definitely TPK. Anyways, 13th Age is a game that I haven't played a lot of, but I still recommend people look into. When did that? What? I think it had a new revision that came out. Yeah, it came out. A new edition came out in 2020. It's Rob Heinzu, fantastic designer. And yeah, it's Rob Heinzu and Jonathan Tweet, two of the people most responsible for what D&D exists as. Jonathan Tweet and Rob Heinzu made Dungeons & Dragons 3rd and 4th editions, respectively. And 13th Age is them making their own game. And it's good. It's just a good game. Every character has a unique thing. And their quote-unquote unique thing is just that. I'm not paraphrasing. That's literally what it's called in the novel. Their unique thing is the thing that makes them unique and interesting. And then the system is based around building up what makes you unique and interesting. And like any role that is based off of what you have as your unique thing has different mechanics because that's your thing. Obviously, that's what you're going to be good at. Combat is designed to pace upwards, insofar as the longer a combat goes on, the more powerful enemies get. But they just escalates. so that you don't have that problem where combat starts with some fairly strong enemies, then halfway through the fight they're all really weak all of a sudden because you've taken out so many of them, and now you're just kind of grinding out and rolling dice to smash down the last couple ones. 13th Age fixes that by saying the longer the fight goes on, the stronger your opponents are. So you need to plan around that. It's a great idea. Basically, 13th Age is a good system, and I recommend that everyone at least look it up. At the very least, it's an interesting system that deserves to be looked at. And again, I honestly would argue that 13th Age is more D&D than D&D is anymore, right? D&D has become sort of this just corporate designed generic fantasy world, and that's a shame. And that's my fear for Elder Scrolls 6, just so I can put that on the record now. If somebody clipped me saying that now, is that I believe that Bethesda is going to make Elder Scrolls 6 so generic that it's going to be uninteresting and unrecognizable to somebody who hasn't played since Morrowind. I would love for a new Morrowind game to come out. Or heck, I'd be happy with a new Oblivion game. Oblivion I enjoy like crazy. Anyways. Ironclaw, the furry RPG. Look, it is. Let's just call it what it is. Ironclaw. The character's race, furry species, becomes extremely important into everything that you can do. Your race is more important than your class. Actually, they're probably about equal. Whereas in a lot of games, you just kind of pick a race that, is either fits your design for your character, or just has the best stat lines. In this, that's more important. It's like you might be a shaman, but a horse shaman is going to be wildly different from a fox shaman, right? And yeah, it's a very lethal system, or at least it was when I played it back then. You just want a game with lizard people? Well, any game can have lizard people. I mean, seriously, like, incorporate lizard people into every game. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't even need, if it doesn't change anything mechanically, then why not, right? Ironclaw was a very lethal game, though. It had a positive feedback loop, so if you start getting... yeah, they'll keep Argonians, because that's so far embedded, but... Yeah, they have to keep Argonians. They'll have Argonians in the new Elder Scrolls because they'll have to. That's the only reason they'll still be there, seriously. So, Ironclaw, when I played it at least, was very lethal. If you took one solid hit, or one crit, or two medium-sized hits, you were effectively out of combat, and you run the risk of your character dying. Some people like that. Some people like that high risk. Other people say, well, I don't want my character to get hurt. I want to play this character because, the character's important to me. I want to overcome challenges, but if I lose the challenge, I don't want the result to be death. I don't want to get sniped with a crossbow at the beginning of combat and be dead before I had any real agency in the situation. I think it's fine to get attached to your characters. I really do. I think you should be attached to your characters. But some systems, 2nd edition, Ironclaw, Fallout, arguably Vampire, definitely Cyberpunk, make your characters less resilient, less able to keep on going, more fragile. And losing a character can be more of a realistic threat in those games. And again, that's between you and your GM. You can. I firmly believe in not killing a player character without that player's consent. That's me. And I have killed characters before. I have killed characters before, and then I've, unkilled characters before. But if the characters don't have a viable means for resurrection, then killing a character needs to be a decision that involves that player. It just does. You just need to have that discussion with your players about, well, are they willing to lose their character? And they might be. They very well might be, and that's perfectly fine. But if they don't, you should always be thinking about alternative death conditions. What does it mean to die? Well, no, let me rephrase. What does it mean to lose a combat encounter? Losing a combat encounter might not mean dying. Losing a combat counter could just as easily mean a setback. And this is something that they talk about in 13th Age, the book, a lot. I strongly recommend, again, anybody with an interest in game design, pick up 13th Age just to read through the book. They have a concept laid out there that I've used in every single system ever since, and that is fail forward. A failure on the dice does not mean that you were not successful at doing the thing. It means that the thing that you tried to do didn't work the way you wanted it to. If you need to pick a lock, and you have a rogue, and they fail a lockpick, what happens in traditional D&D logic? Well, that means they didn't pick the lock. They can try again. Okay, what happens if they fail 3 times in a row? Well, you have a locked door. Nothing happens. You need to get through the door. You can break it down, but that's loud, or you can just keep on waiting while the rogue rolls over and over and over. It's dead. It stops. It stops in its tracks, and it stops being interesting. Hear me out. The rogue is trying to unlock a door. They roll a failed. Let's say that their target number is 15, they roll a 10. Whatever. Oh, you unlock the door. But as the door swings open, you see the Duke in the room. He's actually there. He's naked, and he's in the middle of changing, but you just opened the door to an occupied room. Or you turn picked failed the lockpick. Ooh, that's a natural 1. As soon as you do unlock the door, this fail forward doesn't say that you failed at what you're trying to do. You unlock the door at the same time that a guard turns the corner and sees you do it. You see how this works? It's the idea that failure doesn't mean stop dead. Failure doesn't mean I didn't do the thing. It means I didn't do the thing as I intended for it to happen. I recommend using this in every game system. 13th Age is the one that enumerates and actually codifies it in their system, like as a baseline function of the system. But go read the 13th Age book just for some game design ideas. Seriously, it's a good book. And that's the fail forward idea is something that every GM should do, because it's more interesting. Anyways, fail forward is also how I apply deaths. If you die, that doesn't mean you die. It might mean you get captured. It might mean that you got knocked unconscious. It might mean that you broke a bone and you're going to have to knit through that. But death doesn't have to be death, right? Death means that death means some form of failure, right? And that failure can take whatever form is appropriate. If a player doesn't want their character dying, and they're not taunting death too hard. I mean, if a character has a death wish, they have a death wish. But but if a character is focusing on if a character says to the GM that they don't want their character to die, the player says that to the GM, then the GM should be able and should try to find ways for there to be other penalties than death. You feel like sometimes that doesn't work for some things? That's fair, but that's should. I mean, I'm talking baseline. I'm talking baseline defaults. Everything has to be adapted by on the fly always. But by and large, fail forward can be adapted in every situation in some way, right? The idea is that a failure doesn't stop the plot from progressing. The failure doesn't stop things from being interesting. If a failure results in a non-interesting result, then I would suggest for you to think harder about what an interesting failure might look like. Or a success, Like maybe the rogue lockpicks the door and they open the door and they got a critical. Well, what does a critical success look like for a lockpick? Well, they opened the door and there's the Duke with a mistress. Ooh, now you have a different situation. You have blackmail on them. Because, well, rolling the success didn't just mean they unlocked the door. By getting a critical success, it means that something interesting happened. You see what I'm saying? Anyways, enough about the Duke and his sultry love affairs. Unless you guys want me to keep talking about the Duke. I mean, is that where you want the stream to go? Is that the direction you guys want? I mean, I am just a humble servant of the YouTubes. I can talk about anything. Anyways. Let's talk about prescribed lore. L5R has a lot of prescribed lore. Maybe the Duke can be another stream. Yes. Unless the mistress is a bold, is it not? Well, obviously it's a kobold. Obviously. I don't know. Let's talk about established lore. L5R is a game that has a lot of established lore. What does that mean? That means that there's a lot of lore in the game that already exists. You are going into the world that already has so much setting, and a lot of it very good, a lot of it excellent. But you need to be able to play the setting. In the same way that in Vampire, you need to be able to understand the masquerade and understand how, reality shuffles itself into what the game is trying to accomplish. The same is true in a game like L5R, but to the nth degree. This is a game that almost cannot be played if you don't understand, at the very least, the natures and competitions between the various clans. And that's daunting. To be blunt, that is extremely daunting. You have to know at least some base level of the politicking of the world. If you don't know how the Crane feels about the Scorpion clan, then you'll be lost. And unless you're making a fish out of water character, like I said with Wheel of Time, then you need to know the prerequisites about the world. And that's usually bad. Not always, but usually that's not a great thing. So, what do you do about this? Oh, you read the books. If you want to play the game, you commit to it. And the difference between L5R and something like Vampire is that in Vampire, you can play a fish out of water and say that my character comes out of the world not knowing about the masquerade. They don't know about the secret world of vampires. Okay, that's fine. Wheel of Time, my character lived inside of this, deep in the woods and never really saw the outside world. Okay, cool, explain the world to me. You can't take a class in L5R. You can't choose your character's class until you've read multiple paragraphs of the different clans. This is also somewhat true of Vampire. It's also very true of Shadowrun, where you need to know at least a little bit of the history of the world to be able to play it. Is this a good thing? Not always. Can this be a good thing? Absolutely. Because the world is so fleshed out, it has so much interesting truths and options in it, that you have a already existing living world. The world design is already done, which means that the DM can take that world design and just focus on their part of it, on their storyline, because the world is already existing. That can be good, but like everything else I've said, like most of the stream has been, it requires you to have a working communication between you and your players. It requires you and your players to be on the same page about what your goals are, what you want out of the game, what your intention is for the game. If all of you are huge L5R nerds and you want to nerd out about L5R, sure, you'll love it. But if you have someone in the game who doesn't want to commit to reading the lore, they're probably not going to have as good a time. Does that make sense? Do you follow? Again, this is true of other systems, but in other systems you can be a fish out of water. If you want to be a Dungeons & Dragons character who doesn't know the world, that's fine, because the world is generic enough that anything unique about the world is going to be told to you about your GM. You know about Lord of the Rings, in some sense. That's another one I played here that I didn't add in. I don't really have anything to add about it that hasn't already been added in these other sections, but just for completion, I'll slot it in here as a game that I have played. Okay. Oh, that's right, I need to add in Mordheim is here as well, goodness. Mordheim / Necromunda. which are not traditional TTRPGs, but have some interesting discussion points about them. There we go. But first, to lead into that, I want to save Pathfinder for the end, I think. I think I do, I think I should, I think I might. So let's talk about Princess. Princess the Dreaming is real cool, okay? So, Princess the Dreaming... Hold on. Oh, the new one is called Princess the Hopeful? I think? Yep, Princess the Hopeful. Okay. So Princess is a game where all the players play as magical girls. The core idea of it is that you have a secret identity, you have your normal school life, and then you have these fae queens that have created magical girls, and you need to go fight whatever it is. Now, they had a lot of very cool ideas in here. Is it a good game? I didn't play it for long enough to really get a good idea of it, but the idea, again, follows very similar to these vampire plans, except that here, your background is this fae court world, and the places in between our world and the next. What is that? Why no magical boys? Yeah, the Princess the Hopeful absolutely has rules for playing a male character. That's fine. You can be a male magical girl, or you can be or you can make it part of your transformation that you transform into a girl. All that is fine. That's all stuff that you can work out with your GM. But I wanted to talk about this specifically about where you play your system. Now, I played a game of I've played most of these in different places, right? I've played most of these in different ways. And I played Princess the Hopeful in a... Actually, I think it was Roll20. But wasn't there an anime where a dude turned in... Several. Yeah, several anime where dudes turn into magical girls. Yeah. Birdie the Mighty is the first one off the top of my head, but also... Dang it, can't think of the name of it. There's an entire magical boy anime out there, and it's actually magical. It's by the same people who did Grand Blue Dreaming, which is a fantastic anime that I adore. Anyways, I played this game on Roll20 with people who didn't have microphones. It was entirely text-based. And my ADD brain couldn't. I loved it. I loved the people. I loved my character. My character was awesome. I loved all the people involved. I loved the world. I loved the design. Everything. But I couldn't handle it. I ended up missing sessions, and then I ended up just phasing out of it because my brain just didn't parse the pure text nature of this. I've also tried to do play by post. That was in... I don't remember what system that was in. I think it was a variation of 3.5. I've also tried play by post. Man, it just didn't work for me. My brain couldn't real-time the posts, and in the text-based adventure, I just kept on my brain wandering. Even though I enjoyed it, even though I loved it, I couldn't stay focused on the game. And which is a shame because I still love that group, and you know, I have some close friends who kept on going with the game without me. But I bring this up because I want people to recognize that doesn't mean that you're a bad person. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the game. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the system. It just means that you might prefer something. Some people will only really want to play in person. Something about the physical dice hitting the tabletop and spending time in the same room as friends is core to their experience. And I respect that. I really do. I understand where they're coming from. Some people are fine with play-by-posts and, you know, getting into character once a week to make 3 posts that are about, you know, their stuff. That's fine. It's great. Some people, if I'm doing text-based RPG role-playing, it's usually just a one-nighter. It's usually just me hopping into the RP section of my Discord channel and just doing some little side stuff. But different people have different preferences. That's not even counting LARP. That's not even getting into the completely different experience of LARPing and playing a game where you are directly engaging with people, in face to face. And some people prefer that, and some people hate that because the character that they want to make is so different from who they are IRL that they can't project in a LARP, whereas they can if they're playing 13th Age or Ironclaw or L5R. They can get themselves into that world. Now, I don't have a whole lot to say about Princess the Hopeful itself as a game, but I wanted to use this as a launching pad. Getty, that is a genius response, and it's something that I need to think about more. VR chat as a LARPing tool. That is just brilliant. Yeah. I now really want to do that. You're right. You're just right. There's nothing wrong about it. You're just correct. VR chat would be an incredible tool for LARPing and fix a lot of the, some of the issues that people have with both accessibility and for personality. So, I bring up Princess to Hopeful to highlight this and to say that not all formats work for everybody, right? And also, not all games work for all people. I have friends who I am close friends with, who I like, who I enjoy spending time with, who I consider close, who I will not play a tabletop RPG with. That's fine. I have friends that I will not play a tabletop RPG with. Because, well, that's not the kind of relationship we have. I've played before with them and it didn't work out. I don't really think that the experience was a lot of fun with them. That doesn't mean I can't be their friend. That doesn't mean I can't be their friend. And vice versa, just because somebody plays, a tabletop game doesn't mean that we are friends. That one sounds more obvious, but you still get caught up in that once in a while. This idea of, well, they have to be my friend because we're playing a game together. Especially when you're back in like high school and college, where the people around you are the people you play with, and you sort of get this idea that you're supposed to be friends with them because you're into the same thing and you're in the same place. That doesn't always happen. That doesn't always hold true. Mouse Guard is a lot like 13th Age. The difference is that you play as mice. It's a delight. And it follows the idea of why you do something is more important than what you do. Mouse Guard is big on what is your character's goals, what is your character's dreams, and how hard are they going to fight for these dreams? How are they going to handle what they want? And yeah. And if you're working on something that goes against your dreams, then it's a harder check for you. I haven't played a full game of it. I've heard good things. It's adorable. Is it anything like Redwall? Yes. Mouse Guard is exactly Redwall. Yes. Mouse Guard is Redwall with the serial number filed off. It's very much intended to be designed around the idea of Redwall, and it is pretty adorable. But one of the reasons I brought it up here, and what's going to dovetail nicely into IKRPG, but the reason I bring this up here is because miniatures. I want to start talking about minis now. And also Redwall is what turned me into a furry. So, Mouse Guard has some of the cutest miniatures in the entire world. They're stinking adorable. Go look up Mouse Guard miniatures. They're absolutely stinking adorable. Okay. Reaper makes a line of them. One second here. Yep, Reaper Miniatures makes a lot of mouselings in their lines, and they're stinking adorable. You don't need a miniature to play a game. This does not go without saying. This does not go without saying, because some systems require them. Like, some systems require them, some systems don't. You see why I'm following this off of the Princess one about how people play? Because Mouse Guard and the fact of tabletop and the intersection between tabletop gaming and RPG gaming can be very thin. 4th edition you can't play without a grid. 4th edition assumes that you have a battle map. Honestly, so does 3.5, although people don't like to admit it. Something that's freeform obviously doesn't need anything. You don't need any miniatures, you don't need any persons, you can just walk out there yourself. LARP, you could argue that it requires a costume, but that might, even that's getting a bit gatekeepy. By and large, you don't require things. You never may require minis, but at the same time, they can add a lot, and some people will adore painting them, some people will love painting them for the rest of the party. I personally love painting miniatures, and I have painted miniatures for several of my characters. And I'm very happy that I did, because there was a wonderful experience. But this is something you need to consider. Tabletop Simulator has miniatures. You can actually have miniatures, and if you have Blender and stuff, you can actually paint them yourself. Whereas, some of the other games don't, and it can be very important. You gotta show them off now. I've showed off my miniatures in the past in the Discord. Yeah. But some systems require miniatures and a board and a layout and a table and a grid system, and some require nothing. Pathfinder doesn't even require anything, depending on how you play it. Now, I like playing with a grid. I like the board game aspect of the combat. Personally, I like when there are a billion rules for combat that turns it into an interesting and an engaging board game, and no rules for role-playing outside of combat, where role-playing outside of combat is mostly just me deciding what to roleplay and then acting it out, and then describing my actions to the GM. I like that. I don't like there to be a whole bunch of rules and restrictions on the open role-playing part of things, but I like combat to feel a bit crunchy. I like to be able to make something interesting and cool happen in a combat situation. Which is where people are going to be calling out Lancer for. Look, if you've existed on the internet, and I hope you have, if you've existed on the internet, then you've probably had somebody recommend Lancer to you. Simple fact is that it's a good game. It's a really good game. It's a sci-fi based game. Oh, let me pull up some the things about it. It's a mech game. Yeah, it's a mech game, and yeah, it's a very good one. If you like the gritty mud and lasers sci-fi setting, then you owe it to yourself to pick up Lancer and check it out. And if you don't, that's completely valid. There has mech customization, a lot of character setting options, and a really robust system for building an engaging combat encounter, while giving you the freedom to do what you want outside of combat, without really restricting you outside of combat situations. Which is how I like things. Okay. Now we're getting into some of the final ones and some of the heavier, more meaty ones. Let's talk IKRPG. The Iron Kingdoms RPG. So if you don't know about Iron Kingdoms is the world of Warhammer and War Machine. Warhammer and War Machine is a tabletop game, not a RPG as base level. It's a tabletop game where you paint your miniatures and play with 20 to 40 models on the battlefield against an opponent doing the same thing. No role-playing, no RPG system involved, just you and your army playing not unlike Warhammer, except that frankly War Machine is a better game. I'll get into that later if people want to fight me on it, but again, you can fight me, but you will be wrong. So, IKRPG is the same game. Oh, Tara, how you doing? Is the same game taking into the world of narrative RPGs. And I'll be honest with you, it's kind of the apotheosis of like 4 or 5 different things that we've been talking about today. The Iron Kingdoms RPG has a character class that can start with a mech. A literal mech. Or, if you're playing a warlock, you get a beast. You get an actual additional party member that is a giant monstrosity who likes to eat things. Or a giant coal-powered punch machine that wants to eradicate the world that is controlled by one character. Immediate red flags. This is a game designer's nightmare because, oh no, that means that's the best character. Well, you're right, it is. It just is. But an effective RPG party doesn't treat a mech as being one players. Yeah, the Warcaster is the one who controls it, but to make an engaging party, then it's the team's mech. It's not the Warcaster's mech, it's the party's mech. And this comes back into what I was saying with Big Eye Small Mouth and a couple of these other ones, is you need to have that social contract with your team, with the other people you're playing with. Are you okay with recognizing that the person who has the mech is going to be stronger? Because they just are. But if you treat it as we have a mech, they control it, but it's ours, you're going to be having a lot more fun. That way that one player doesn't lord it over you. Iron Kingdoms also, I think it's a really good game. I enjoy Iron Kingdoms RPG. It does a very effective way of handling RNG. That is to say, every roll is 2d6 with plus modifiers, plus all of your minus negative modifiers, all of that obvious stuff. Every roll is 2d6 versus target number, plus skills. Which means every single roll has that natural bell curve that will average out to a 7, with going higher or lower as necessary. However, characters also have an additional die as a limited resource that you can spend to roll an additional die. So you can use that for attack or damage. Or you could tap yourself out and use all of your powers for that turn to get it on both. And fall asleep on the next turn. You have these options of adding a bit of a swing to it. So it's RNG with a bell curve with the ability to change that bell curve, which I like. I like that as a core mechanic. I think that's a cool idea. Okay. Mordheim / Necromunda. Mordheim is another tabletop RPG, but it's an interesting one in that it has some RPG elements. Now, it's a tabletop game. Mordheim and Necromunda, at their base level, they are campaign-based tabletop games. You have an army of about 5 or whatever number. You have an army of about 5 characters, 5 to 10 characters, and you play a tabletop game against another player. But then they add in more RPG elements to it, and say, yeah, no, you just play a small skirmish-based game, and then if your character died in the game, you have to roll on a wounds table. They might be dead. They might get a vicious scar that actually is a buff that causes enemies to fear them. Maybe they'll be perfectly fine. Maybe they found an extra piece of shiny rock when they were knocked out of combat. Maybe their arm got broken, and for the next 2 games they're going to be at minus disadvantages. It adds RPG longevity into what is not a traditional tabletop-based game, a traditional RPG game. Is that good? That's up to you. I mean, I don't know. But it is an interesting way of having less roleplay in a role-playing game, because you're making stories for your own team, for your own party, in between missions, but you're not role-playing with a group the way you are in any of the other things here. This is an outlier, but I specifically listed it as an outlier because of its unique nature. It's a very unique game that I do that if you enjoy small-scale skirmish games, it's worth checking out. But it's another way of role-playing. Instead of making these... Vanguard, I think, is the other one here. Is a newer and much, frankly, better version of these same systems. Vanguard is a... Who is this? Hold on. I forget. It's one of the... It's one of these the companies that split off of Warhammer to make a game that was like Warhammer but different. Kings of War. Kings of War. Yep, Kings of War Vanguard is the one I'm talking about here. Mantic Games. I know there's actually a couple people who are going to be yelling at me for not knowing that. I know I have friends at Mantic. I should know this. Anyways, yeah, that's just another of these similar ideas where they are not RPGs in the traditional sense, but that does, in the same way that a LARP isn't a traditional RPG, or that Freeform isn't what you think of as being a traditional RPG, though obviously it is the most traditional of all of them. These are not traditional RPGs, and they're not party-based, not team-based, but that doesn't mean you can't roleplay with them. Alright, let's talk Monsters Care Squad. You know I was going to talk about this. You all were excited for me talking about this. Everybody knew I was going to talk about it. It's a good game. Go play it. Okay, moving on. No. Monster Care Squad is a very good game. I do want to make more content from it because I got the go-ahead from the company to make videos about it, and I just kind of never did. That's on me. But the general idea of it is neat from the ground up. Everyone is playing as an expert in their field, and their field is helping giant monsters. Think of Monster Hunter, except that you hug the monsters instead of kill them. There are giant monsters that roam the landscape, and you play as some sort of doctor. The giant monsters usually help out the local people in their lands, think Spirit Island, either by making the crops grow, or by bringing the rains in the seasons, or by protecting the waters from from any dangerous predators. There's giant creatures that assist the land and the world around it. And the party are the ones that are called when one of these monsters gets sick. They go out, have to diagnose it, they have to treat the illnesses, and it is wholesome, it's wonderful, and there's very little combat. And I want to highlight that there doesn't need to be combat. There doesn't need to be. Because the words that people get mixed up all the time is conflict and combat. To have an engaging story, you need conflict. You need there to be something... Soundwave superior? What? Oh. Shout out to Soundwave, sure. If you want to have an engaging game, there needs to be some sort of conflict that needs to be resolved. What form that takes can change from game to game, but it doesn't always have to be combat. And in Monster Care Squad, it usually isn't. It's more about finding what needs to be resolved to protect the monster, to protect the land, to protect the people who live in it. And I think that is a excellent mentality going forth. It also helps exercise your brain of creating non-combat encounters, because a combat encounter doesn't have to be... I'm sorry. An encounter doesn't have to be a combat encounter. I'll talk more about Obsidian challenges and how to incorporate non-combat encounters into traditional RPGs on a future stream, because I use them extremely heavily. But the general idea is that what you're creating doesn't need to be limited towards just being combat oriented, right? You can do whatever you want. So look up some of those games, find the one that fits well. Okay, we're going to talk about Pathfinders now. I have no idea who Elita 1 is, but I hope they have a good time. Alright, Pathfinder. So initially I hated Pathfinder 1st Edition. Pathfinder 1st Edition was what happens when a new edition of something beloved comes out that people don't love. And Paizo splintered off and tried to make 3.5 into 3.75. They tried to make an updated version of D&D 3.5. Well, they even promoted it as D&D 3.75. Now we go all the way back to the OGL discussion we had at the beginning, because they were allowed to do this purely because of the existence of the old OGL license. They were able to make their own game and publish it and make good money off of it because, well, they tapped into the people who were mad at 4th edition. Which put an immediate bad taste in my mouth, personally, as somebody who will stand for E. But they said right out of the gate, Pathfinder is compatible with D&D 3.5. Pathfinder is designed for people who like 3.5 and are sad that 4th edition exists. Pathfinder exists to be D&D 3.75 for people who don't want to move on to what 4th edition is. And it's also a big part of why D&D 5th edition pushed back more towards 3.5. 5th edition D&D is a lot more similar to 3.5 for that reason. It's because they wanted to reclaim the people who they lost when 4th edition came out, because 4th edition was different. Again, 4th edition is good, but it is very different from D&D. And a lot of people who liked classic D&D were turned off by the more board gamey, the more cinematic nature of it. They wanted something a bit more crunchy and a bit more, I don't want to say grounded because we were still playing a funny elf game, but people who wanted a bit more gritty style that 3.5 and 5e cover slightly better. So Pathfinder's base existence is something that I don't love, insofar as it exists because people were mad at D&D 4th edition, and they just wanted more 3.5, so they said, hey, we're just going to make more 3.5. You know what? Fine. Fine on them. They found their target audience, they made their game, and a lot of people liked it. And I frankly wasn't really bothered by that, though it was a bit annoying that people would shunt off 4th edition without even trying it. That's my complaint, really. So, is it a good game? If you like D&D 3.5, yeah, it's D&D 3.5 plus 1. That's exactly what it was designed to be from the ground up. That's exactly what it is. It works. It works, and it just is fantastic for somebody who wants exactly that. Pathfinder 2nd edition, though, is a much different game. Pathfinder 2e really is its own game, and even though I had originally shuffled it off because Pathfinder 1st edition was so retro, it wasn't breaking any new ground. It was in fact going back and unbreaking the ground that 4th edition had broken. 2nd edition of Pathfinder does quite the opposite and really does spin itself off into being a new game. And I think that's awesome, because, well, Pathfinder 2nd edition is genuinely a delight. If you want something that will replace 5th edition, because of a Wizards of the Coast boycott, which I will be doing myself as well, then Pathfinder 2nd edition really is a good target. It hits a lot of the generic fantasy that people like about Dungeons & Dragons. You can do a lot with the system, but the way it manages character creation and character building has a little bit of that 4th edition DNA in it, where combat should be a bit more board gamey, should be a bit more constructed, should be a bit more handled with uniques and specifics, and cool abilities that let you do cool things. Cool abilities that let you do cool things should be a staple of any RPG. I'm serious about that. They're not always, but you know what? Sometimes they should be. So, frankly, Pathfinder 2nd edition is very good in that regard. One thing that I've always liked about, well, systems that I've liked, I guess, is that you're allowed to do things as a non-magical character, which was a big problem in 3.5, and a bigger problem in 2nd edition, is if you didn't have magic, you weren't good at the game. 5th edition, honestly, has a bit of that too. They kind of backtracked and went back to the caster supremacy thing. 4th edition, that's not true. 4th edition, if you're a martial class, you get to do cool backflips. They let you have fun. But Pathfinder is very comparable to the various editions of D&D, and I would honestly call it D&D 4.5. It's somewhere between 4th edition and 5th edition. And honestly, that's great news for me, frankly. The action system is unique. The character building system. My biggest complaint about it is that they call everything a feat. Everything is called a feat. You have class feats, you have heritage feats, you have specific background feats, you have general feats. It's annoying to a fault. And I was talking about this with Sprig on her stream the other day. Is that everything is called a feat, which kind of really dilutes the term into meaninglessness. I don't know. I thought that was a bit dumb. But as far as the actual gameplay and base mechanics go, seems very good. You'll probably be seeing some Pathfinder content on here in the future, so look forward to that. So this covers like 25 games. I'm not counting this. I'm not counting this mess. Somebody else can add this up. I don't care. That I have played, and what some of the pros and cons. And I hope your takeaway from this isn't to laser in on something. I hope your takeaway isn't from this, I'm going to go play 4th edition. Well, I wouldn't mind that. I hope your takeaway isn't, I'm going to immediately join it. I hope your idea that you get out of this is, now that you know a bit more about various role-playing games, that you have an idea of what is important to you. Because that's what really the most important thing is what is important in a role-playing game to you. What in an RPG is important for you as a player? Do you want the physical connection of a LARP? Do you want the modern realism of something that is cyberpunk? Because we live in a cyberpunk dystopia. We do. Admit it. Just admit it. We are currently, right now, living in a cyberpunk dystopia. So that, you know, a lot of these things really do hit strong. Do you want to be a furry? Sure, Ironclaw exists and it's not a bad game. Do you want to play with miniatures? Well, there's several on here that encourage you to use miniatures. What I want you to take away from this is more the option of the thought process of what is important to you as a player. I want you to think about what it is that you go to an RPG for. Do you want something that's more generic, that can fill any role? Or is there a specific game that's going to target into exactly what you're trying to play? And if there is, if you want to play a sci-fi game, there's a good chance you'll have more fun in Lancer than you will in a D20 sci-fi mod, in a mod for D&D 5th edition that happens to let you play in a sci-fi world. If you want to play in a unique and strange fantasy world, maybe Iron Kingdoms RPG is going to be better for you than a generic D&D setting. If you want to play in a specific franchise, don't be afraid to find content from that franchise, you know, and try to work that in a more direct thing. If you want to play, I don't know, Dresden Files, is that one of them? Like, I'm certain that exists, you know? My goal for you is for all of you to think. My goal for you is for you to think about what you're playing and why. And use that as a springboard for deciding on the system that's going to work best for you and your players. And once you find the system that works best for you and your players, have a good time. Have a good time. D&D has been the default for too long. My ending thoughts are this. D&D has never been the best RPG system. Ever. There's always been other options. And for specific groups and for specific goals and for specific games, different RPG systems are going to fit your goals better. And that's always been true. But now that Hasbro is crumbling their own ivory tower, people are going to be more willing to think about these things and come to these decisions. People are going to be willing to think about these things and decide on their own what system is going to be best for themselves. And I hope that you're among those people who decides not based on, well, this is what everybody else is doing, but instead, this is what's going to be best for me and my players. Does anybody have any closing questions or thoughts? You enjoyed the Dark Heresy line of TTRPG? Okay, that's completely valid. Something that I haven't played myself, but I respect. Dark Heresy is a Warhammer-inspired game. Well, it's a Warhammer game, I guess I should just say. It's a game that takes place in the Warhammer 40k universe, right? I think, yeah. I think that's right. That's probably right. I'm probably right about that. Like the video if I'm right. Dislike the video if I'm wrong. I don't know. Go ahead, whatever. It is? Yay! That means you're gonna like the video. Are there any good skill tree based fantasy RPGs? That's an interesting question. I would say that what is the defining feature of a skill tree to you? What is it about a skill tree that you find engaging? Because Pathfinder 2nd Edition has a lot of paths that you can take that feel like skill trees. Every class can unlock an archetype that is somewhere between a multi-class and, or it can literally be a multi-class, somewhere between that, somewhere between a paragon, somewhere between a specialization path that you can unlock for your character that unlocks a lot more options for the character. Likewise, I mean, yeah, Iron Kingdom is heavily rooted in that as well. So I guess really the question there is, what is it about skill trees that really intrigues you in a system, right? If it is the clear progression system, from what you're describing, Pathfinder would work, but there's also our classless RPGs out there. I can't think of off the top of my head, because usually if I'm reaching for a classless RPG, it's going to be freeform. But, yeah, I would say that a classless RPG is going to give you as much customization as you want or desire. But if you wanted the clear progression, I would probably say of my list of the ones that I've played, probably Pathfinder 2nd Edition is probably going to be the best one for leading you down a progression system that still gives you a lot of options. But, I mean, there's obviously, you know, infinite games out there. Oh, that was another... I just remembered another game I played and I have no idea what the system is called. It was a sci-fi system about exploring other planets and it was really fun. I have no idea what that game was. Oh well. I think that about covers everything that I wanted to cover today. Wait, was it Starfinder? No, that's Paizo. No. I'm gonna be bugged by this. Oh well. Does anybody else have any other questions or thoughts? Okay. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you had a good time, and I hope that this has given you some ideas or opened up your brain mind in some meaningful way. Thank you all, and I hope that you have a wonderful evening. Cheers, friends.